So right now I have this Dell OptiPlex powered up, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, you know what's better than just one Dell OptiPlex? That's right, multiple Dell OptiPlexes. Just because we have all of these awesome Apple desktops here doesn't mean that we should just ignore the PC side of things, especially when it comes to an awesome set of Dell OptiPlexes like we have here. So it's obvious that we have two OptiPlex systems here, but these are actually not identical because this one is actually a 380 and this one is a 780. So even though visually they look identical on the outside, it's entirely possible that this one has better specifications compared to this one. I have no idea what we actually have in terms of the specifications here, so we're just going to have to open these up and find out. Now if that sounds awesome to you, then stick around because we have a lot of awesome stuff coming up. We're going to clean the entire systems here, we're going to take a look at the specifications, and most importantly, we have to see if these actually work in the first place. My best guess is that these are probably from around 2009, 2010. This one actually has a Windows 7 sticker, so it's entirely possible that this is the early Windows 7 era, and if it's around that time period, I don't think it would have a first generation i-series Intel chip, so this is probably the Core 2 Duo, or even a Core 2 Quad type of system. But again, we're just going to have to take a closer look at this, and honestly, I can't wait. I've had these for a little while, and I've never even looked at them until now. To start things off, we're going to open up the 380 and see what we have, and as for the 780, this one will need some extra repairs because, as you can see, the side panel is off. Now the reason why is because there is actually a small dent here in the corner, so that's going to have to be fixed. But apart from that, it's otherwise in good cosmetic shape. Both of these are actually in good shape, they just really need a good cleaning. The OptiPlex 380 actually has a manufacture date of 2010. Now as this is a slim PC, it's obviously intended for something like an office environment, maybe a computer lab, something like that. Essentially business oriented. Now even though this is from 2010, this OptiPlex, which is 9 years older, so 2001, is actually smaller than this. Now it's not necessarily a complete comparison because this obviously has a Pentium 3 inside, and it was intended for like Windows 2000, at least based on the sticker here, and this is a Windows 7 era system, but it is still interesting to see this side by side. Now as for the 380 here, we do have a full-size DVD drive here, and we also have a blank slot, which is probably for something like an SD card reader, or something like a multi-format reader. It's entirely possible that there may be a model out there with a floppy drive, but even by 2010, I'm pretty sure that it was on the way out. Maybe there were some legacy hardware components, or even an earlier design which had it on board, but I doubt that this would actually have a floppy drive controller. On the front here we have a microphone and headphone jack, not just one that does both, and we also have two USB ports. Now as this is from 2010, it's definitely going to be just USB 2. It's still very capable, but it's obviously no USB 3. We also have a power button right here, and we have the Dell logo. Now you can actually flip the orientation of this. I don't know how this specific model is adjusted, but at least on this OptiPlex here, you just have to remove this plastic piece, and on the back here, you can easily adjust the Dell logo. Now you don't have to do this, but this is just to make it look nicer depending on if you have it in a vertical orientation or a horizontal one. And once you're done, you just clip it back into place, and the end result is really awesome. Unfortunately, we do not have any stickers down here telling us if we have a Core 2 whatever system, or specifying that it runs Windows 7 or something like that. It does have the spot for it right here, but they're just not there. On either side, we have the awesome Dell logo here, which is stamped into the metal, and around the back here, we have a good amount of I/O. Now the main focus is obviously on the newer OptiPlexes here, but the reason why I'm keeping the 2001 system is because just take a look at this. There's a 9-year difference between this desktop and this one, but surprisingly they look very similar, if not identical, in many ways. Now obviously the orientation of the power supply is different, but that's just, you know, how it's organized. As for the actual I/O here, we do have line output, as well as a combination here for the input, or a microphone input. We do of course have Ethernet. At this point, considering it's a 2010 system, I would hope it's gigabit. We also have not 2, not 4, but 6 USB ports, which is really awesome. And below that we have Parallel. Who remembers Parallel? I've never personally used this, nor do I really have many devices that could really take advantage of it, but it is awesome to see it, especially on a desktop like this. We also have VGA for video, and we have Serial. Now, I use VGA all the time, but just like Parallel, I've never really used Serial either. But again, it is really cool to see all of this legacy I/O. And because this is a slightly larger system, we actually have 3 different card slots. On the older Dell OptiPlex, it looks surprisingly similar, right? In fact, it's so similar that even the color scheme and the icons are identical. Nearly a decade between the hardware here, yet they are surprisingly similar in more ways than one. Now obviously it's still not 100% identical because on the older system here, instead of having more USB ports, we have PS2 ports for the keyboard and the mouse. Those were obviously removed because at this point, pretty much all the keyboards and mice were using USB. Another iconic part about these early 2000s Dells is that we have diagnostic LEDs. Now these are really cool, probably not all that great to look at if there's actually a problem, but it is still a small feature about these systems. I'm sure that a lot of these had error messages, especially regarding, bad capacitors, because systems from around this time typically suffered from bad capacitors. We do of course still have USB and Ethernet, and as for the audio situation, we actually have 3 separate connectors here, and we also have onboard video with VGA. Now, apart from the connectors being condensed into one output and one input, it's still really cool to see how identical these systems actually are. Even the cooling situation, this actually has the same design language. Another great part about these Dell systems is that they're really easy to work on. There's a latch on the top or the side, depending on the orientation here. Yeah, we're really gonna have to clean this later on. So this of course is more modern looking compared to the 2001 OptiPlex, but it still retains some 2000s qualities, such as this ventilation shroud here, which is definitely reminiscent, especially from the Pentium 4 era, and it looks like we can easily remove this because we have a handy little blue indicator here. So my guess is that, yeah, it just slides out. See, it's really easy. We do actually have a hard drive here. It's a 7200 RPM drive, and it says that it's actually an 80 gigabyte drive. So I guess if it's like a lower end system from around this time, I guess it makes sense. But considering this is from 2010, that's actually kind of small. If I'm reading this date code properly, this might be from like 2007. It's entirely possible that this may not even be the original factory drive. But considering, this isn't going to be like my main desktop or anything, I think 80 gigabytes will be just fine. I do have other drives which are higher capacity, but considering most of those are laptop style drives, not full-size desktop drives, I think that this one is going to be just fine, especially considering, it's a 7200 RPM drive, not something slower, and I'm not going to be running Windows 10 or anything like that. We have the other OptiPlex off to the side here, which does exactly that. This is actually from 2010. We do have RAM. The first stick here is a 1 gigabyte stick, probably DDR2. I still need to remember what type of configuration these RAM sticks have. I'm guessing that it's probably going to be another 1 gigabyte stick, and yeah, it's exactly the same. It's from Kingston, and that means that we have a total of 2 gigabytes of RAM for the system here. So I just double checked the actual RAM amount in terms of the speed, and this is actually a DDR3 system. It's clocked at 1333 megahertz, and I guess that means that DDR3 RAM really is pretty old. I know that DDR4 and even DDR5 is now available, but DDR3 should still be more than capable, especially for something like this. This system obviously supports SATA drives because the DVD drive itself is SATA, as well as the hard drive. We even have a free slot right here. But what I love about this is that we just have this gigantic ribbon cable here, which has actually been condensed down to take less space, and I believe this actually goes for the front I/O here. So my guess is that Dell probably had some spare components and they just decided to integrate it within the system like this. I don't think this is an IDE type of connection here, but it is still really funny to see. They obviously did not have to do this at all, but they actually spent the extra time and effort, I guess that's one way of calling it, to put the Dell logo on the CPU shroud itself, which is really cool. Now, I'm pretty sure that we'll have some kind of integrated video chipset on the CPU itself. Maybe this is the entire video that we have on the system in terms of onboard video. That is, if this is even a GPU in the first place. But as we saw earlier, we also have this free SATA slot right here. We have the 3 available PCI slots. This one obviously intended for a PCIe graphics card. It seems like we have some extra additional connectors here, but it also looks like we have some unpopulated components here. This looks like it might actually be for a floppy connection. It's entirely possible that an older model has this populated. And finally, just like the Mac desktops that we actually have an internal speaker, which is really cool. Not to mention super handy, especially if you have multiple desktops and you don't always have a set of speakers on hand. Now obviously, having worked on several Dell desktops, there's a variety of different ways to remove the blank slots here for the cards. But this is the first time I've seen something like this. Now this is wild. Not to mention super handy because it makes it a lot easier to clean this up if you can actually remove the entire thing. Now, as is pretty common with these Dells, there's an indicator button which tells the system if the side panel has been removed. Even this Dell OptiPlex has that feature built in. And it looks like we have a 235 watt power supply. Now this is a slightly weird configuration because it's not exactly a standard size. And as for the heatsink here, this definitely reminds me of the Pentium 4 era with this pretty crazy design. I removed the newest Dell OptiPlex here, and I've plugged in the cables into this one to see if it actually powers up. So far, so good. And we don't have anything inside the DVD drive, but we do actually have video. So this is probably just for the CMOS battery. And we actually have Windows on here. It looks like Windows 7. So we have Windows 7 Professional. The speaker works, and we don't have a password. It looks like this is a fresh install. So if we wanted to, we could use it right now. So the OptiPlex has been running for a little while at this point. And just like every other Dell system I've used, it's working without a problem. Now at this point, we really haven't done anything intensive. We're just sitting at the desktop here. It sounds normal. It's actually doing Dell computer things. And it really does seem like we have a stock install of Windows 7 Professional. Surprisingly, this doesn't have a Core 2 Duo. It has a Pentium dual-core CPU, an E5400 clocked in at 2.7 gigahertz. We do have the 2 gigabytes of RAM, which we saw earlier, and this is actually a 32-bit copy. What's also interesting about this is that this seems to be a Dell version, so we actually have like the Dell icon here. We even have Dell support here, and Windows is actually activated. It seems to be a completely fresh copy. It's really just Windows 7 with nothing else installed. It's even called Dell PC, which is what I would typically name a system like this. It is of course an OptiPlex 380, and as for the graphics, it looks like we have the Intel G4 One Express chipset. And right now it's using 781 megabytes of the total system memory. But otherwise we do have these awesome DirectX features. It's all enabled. Now that we know that everything actually works on this system, for the most part anyways, let's power this down and take a look at the 780. Just like we saw earlier, the 380 and the 780 are visually identical on the front here, and what I realized about the Dell logo is that it's super easy to move. I'm not sure why it's not that easy on the 380. It's possible that this just needs a good clean. It actually did free up a little bit, but just like on the other system, we have a DVD optical drive right here. We have a blank slot for potential expandability. We have a microphone and a headphone jack, 2 USB ports, the power button, obviously the Dell logo, and we do also have a spot for stickers, but just like on the other system, we don't have anything. Just like on the 380, the panel itself can easily be removed. It's a little more difficult because of the damage in the corner here, but it really isn't that significant, and I'm sure I can bend this back into place. Now, I don't know how obvious it'll be on camera. We'll take a closer look at it. The damage is pretty much around this corner here, but considering we can take out this entire panel piece, it should be relatively straightforward to bend back into place, considering, you know, it's easy to work on. But just like on the other system, we have an optical drive right here. This one is actually older than the other one, but it is still from 2010. And if we remove the drive here, we do actually have a hard drive. Now, just like on the other system, this is SATA. This is also SATA, and it seems like we also have another free SATA connector on the motherboard itself. This time we have a Seagate hard drive. It's a 250 gigabyte drive. It is also 7200 RPM, but this one was actually made in 2013. So considering the other one had an older hard drive and this one has a newer one, it seems like these were replaced in the past, but it is very nice to see that it actually has the hard drive sled here because it makes installation a lot easier. So we can put the DVD drive back in its spot for now. The CPU fan shroud looks pretty much identical, and the same goes for the cooler itself. Honestly, for the most part, this is a very visually identical system, but we do actually have a couple of changes, and I'm just now realizing I need to remove this again if we want to take a look at the RAM. So you may have noticed that on the other system, we only had 2 RAM slots, but on this one, we actually have 4. This actually has 2 gigabytes of RAM, so checking the information on this specific RAM stick, it looks like this is also DDR3, but this is actually a better version because this is clocked in at 1600 megahertz and not 1333. Not only that, because we actually have more RAM slots to work with in the first place, this could probably take even more RAM than the other system. And I'm going to assume that this is probably going to be the same. So it is the same amount of RAM, at least in terms of capacity. This might actually be clocked in at a lower speed. Now this is actually a pretty interesting configuration because even though it's the same amount of RAM, according to this number right here, the PC3-8500U identifier, it seems like this is actually clocked in at 1066, not 1600. Kind of a strange configuration, but considering it was inside the system and the other one works, I guess we'll just have to see if this one works with it. So we can reinstall the DVD drive again and see what else the system has to offer. Now, I forgot to mention that on the other system, it was surprisingly clean on the outside. This one has a little bit more dust, but it is still really clean for its age, so it looks like we won't have to do that much work on the inside. Obviously, I still will go ahead and wipe down at least, the major components here, such as this, the hard drive, the CPU fan shroud, but otherwise there we have the RAM with the extra RAM slots. We have a very similar configuration with the CPU here, this heatsink right here, the Intel chipset, extra chipsets here. Considering the 380 reported that this battery did not work, it's possible that this one may not hold a charge either. This is an exact copy of the 380 in terms of the actual PCI slots. Interestingly enough, it doesn't have an internal speaker. Now that is something that I was not expecting. It does have the mounting hardware and the hardware on the motherboard itself to support it. It also looks like we had provisions for a floppy controller, but just like on the other one, it is not there. And as for the I/O on the back, it looks pretty much identical, but that is something we'll have to take a look at because this one does have some extra features. We also have a slightly better power supply inside the system. It's rated at 255 watts instead of 235. Now this right here is the reason why the door won't close. As you can see, it is kind of jammed into place. So this is something that I will have to see if I can bend this back into place. It looks like the plastic is still in okay shape. It's not broken or anything. It's ever so slightly damaged, but I'm pretty sure I can just fix this. And comparing it with the other one, which is actually in good condition, it looks like I'll be able to get this back in working condition. Looking at it from this angle, yeah, it looks pretty bad, but honestly, considering we can take out this entire piece right here, it honestly shouldn't be too bad to fix, considering it looks like we just have to bend back a couple of pieces here. Structurally, the rest of the housing itself seems to be perfectly fine, so we're pretty lucky that it's only on this part right here. And again, a little bit on the door, but it's almost non-existent. There's a lot of similarities between the 380 and the 780, such as the power supply itself. Even though it looks identical though, we saw that this one is actually a little bit better than this one. And just like on the 380, we have a very similar configuration on the back here. We have audio output and a combination jack for audio input. We have 6 USB ports and Ethernet, VGA, serial, and parallel connections. You may have noticed though that we have something extra unique only on the 780. We have not only eSATA, but DisplayPort. Now this would make for an awesome bridge machine because you have all of these legacy and modern connections here. Not only that, I just realized that we actually have a USB Wi-Fi adapter. So that's awesome. I guess we'll have to check to see if this actually works, but having a Wi-Fi adapter like this is always handy. I guess for now we can leave it back in the Dell here because maybe it's configured to work with it. So yeah, despite having almost 2 identical Dell desktops here, there's just enough of a difference going on internally to make them their own unique thing. Obviously, the 780 has some advantages because we have more RAM slots, we have extra ports on the back, but the 380 is still a decent system to have, and it actually has a Pentium processor. Now, we still have to obviously test this one out to see if we actually have a Core 2 whatever based system or even another Pentium, but according to the sticker here, it says that it was also manufactured in 2010. Now, it wasn't as obvious to see because there's another sticker on the 380 specifically saying when it was made. The 780 doesn't have any other stickers. It doesn't even have a Windows product key sticker. I also noticed this just now. It seems like the fan here for the CPU is actually misaligned. So I reopened up the 380 here, and you can see that it is indeed installed incorrectly, or at the very least, something happened to it if this got dropped. But it looks like we're going to have to disassemble this a bit more than I thought just to realign everything. But at the very least, we have a second system to compare it to. That's one advantage of having two of them. Okay, now this is awesome. We actually have diagnostic LEDs on the front here. So it turns out that they actually kept it, but moved it to a better spot so you can actually see what the problem is. Now when it comes to Dell OptiPlex systems, I know a bit more about the older ones and the newer ones here. So this is going to be really awesome. I can finally actually try out a system like this. And while actually taking a look at this, I also found out that, yeah, something is not exactly right there. We're definitely going to have to disassemble this a bit because this is very out of alignment. But at the very least, it does actually power up. The only reason why I did not see this initially on the other system, I was amazed it had Windows installed, let alone a fresh copy. No way. This actually has something newer than Windows 7? I guess it's not super surprising, especially if this was used, for a long time, but it's still funny to see this version of Windows on a Dell desktop like this. Awesome! So it looks like we are in a blue screen loop because it's rebooting and I doubt it's going to do anything else. Wow! Thank you, Automatic Repair. Very helpful. Your PC did not start correctly. Press restart to restart your PC, which can sometimes fix the problem. Probably won't, but I guess we could try. Also press advanced options to try other options. So we could just continue, we could reset, or power it down. But if this thing keeps on boot looping, then I guess we can just install whatever we want. Yay! Awesome. Yeah, I wasn't really expecting much to begin with because, clearly there's something wrong with the install here if it's just going to keep on boot looping. When you think of a desktop like this, Windows 10 isn't exactly like what comes to mind. I guess it is a bit more accurate for this system, and it runs Windows 10 really well, especially with the SSD that this has. But considering we have a hard drive in this, I think this is going to be a good candidate for another older version of whatever we want to install. Now, even though we can't check the system information from Windows, we can go into the system setup menu here. This is built into the Dell itself. So we do have 4 GB of RAM, and it is downclocking it to 1066, so it's compatible with both of them. Now, this could always be an upgrade path because obviously we have free RAM slots, and it is indeed DDR3. As for the CPU, we do not have a Pentium, we have a Core 2 Duo. It's an E7500 clocked at 2.93 GHz, so the system itself seems to post, it seems to actually work, it's just Windows that's obviously blue screening. At the very least though, it does actually power up, which is more than what I can say for this G5 right here, which still needs to be cleaned up. But now we're going to clean up these systems right here because even though the inside is relatively dust-free, especially considering the age of these OptiPlexes, the outside is kind of a different story. Even though from a distance, it isn't, completely terrible, the closer you actually look at it, the worse it gets. So yeah, these really do need to be cleaned up, not to mention that they don't exactly feel like a clean computer, so it'll just help with the actual appearance of these, and that means I can actually handle these without having to wash my hands all the time. Apart from the minor damage and the plastics that need to be realigned, everything about the 780 is in fantastic shape. The same goes for the 380. It's in better condition because it doesn't have any damage whatsoever, and who knows how long it's been since this was ever cleaned. Maybe the last time it was in brand new condition was when it left the factory. And even though it's not going to be completely brand new, it's going to be significantly better than how it is right now. The OptiPlexes are now cleaned up, and to be honest, it wasn't really that bad to begin with on the inside here. There wasn't really any big dust buildup like on the motherboard or even around the drive bay here. Yeah, it was still dusty, but I've seen far worse systems. This one was actually pretty decent. In fact, it was probably worse on the outside than the inside. And with the 780 that we have in front of us here, when I took out the hard drive to clean it up, I figured why not actually connect this up to the other Dell OptiPlex, the 3020 that has Windows 10. And what do you know, it actually showed up directly within Windows. I was able to take a quick look at what's actually on here, and it seems like it's just a pretty basic standard Windows install. Nothing more than just a couple of Office applications. And the hard drive itself, it seems to be in good condition. Yeah, it does have a decent amount of hours on it, but Crystal Disk Info says that it's still in good health. There's nothing really concerning about it. So I'm going to reinstall this because, I mean, it was inside the system to begin with, and 250 gigabytes should be good enough for a system like this. The 780 also had that USB adapter for Wi-Fi, and what do you know, it actually worked without a problem. So again, while I had the 3020 powered up, Windows immediately detected it, and the system acted as if it always had Wi-Fi. It was easily able to detect the network itself, so I guess I now have a USB Wi-Fi adapter, which is pretty cool. While cleaning it up, I was also able to see what's actually wrong in terms of the plastics and the alignment. Honestly, it could be worse. For the most part, it is better than how we started off with. Now, for example, this part right here, which doesn't clip into place, well, the reason why it doesn't clip into place is because the clip itself that is on this part is actually broken. But honestly, that's just a minor detail. At least now we know what's actually wrong with it. The corner here with the most amount of damage, as you can see, it looks significantly better. Now, I know it's not going to be perfect like on the other Dell OptiPlex, but the fact that we can actually remove this without it getting completely stuck is still a big improvement. The reason why this was stuck before is because this was kind of jammed into place with the metal that was actually bent inwards, and this piece itself honestly suffered the most, or at least a decent amount, because the damage caused it to bend inwards. And even though for the most part I was able to kind of straighten it out, this area right here snapped because of all the extra stress on the metal itself, and that's definitely a weak point because it's basically a tiny connection. But the fact that we're able to reinstall this, and for the most part the case itself is still in okay condition, is good enough for me because we can actually close the door now. Now, probably the only real way to bend this completely back into place is to further disassemble the housing, but honestly that's just not really worth it because, again, it's not going to be perfect, but it is still way better than before. While cleaning up the rest of the system, I saw we also have some extra cosmetic damage on this corner right here, but again, it really isn't that big of a deal because it still has a nice clean finish here. It's just something to keep in mind about because you don't want this to accidentally break off. So it's not exactly perfect because it does seem like we have some misalignment issues. Like, this is just because the metal is bent here. I tried to bend this back, and for the most part, it's in better condition than before. It also seems to me that the 780 might actually have some kind of paint finish, which I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, because with the 380 here, it kind of has a more matte finish. Like, it's not as shiny as this. So it's possible that this has some kind of paint coating, but it doesn't look terrible. It just doesn't seem worth it to spend the extra time to remove it because it's not bad. Like, it's obviously different compared to the 380, but I guess that's just another way we can visually tell the difference between this system and the 380. Now, as for the 380 here, in some ways it's better than the 780, and in others the 780 is in better shape. Now, the weird pattern thing that is on the side panel on both sides, this was something that I was not able to remove pretty much at all. There was a lot of dirt and debris on the metal itself, but this seems to actually affect the finish here, so I'm not entirely sure what could have caused this, but structurally the plastics for the most part are in good condition, and we don't have any, metal alignment issues. We can still open this up without a problem, and as you can see, the way that this is installed is actually pretty similar to the other system in terms of the panel gap here, so I'm not super concerned with that on the 780. This one basically had no dust at all. In fact, this one was actually even better than the 780. So now it really does look like a brand new system again. And going around all the plastics here, everything is in good condition. There's no cracks, there's no scratches. On the top here, we had the remnants of a sticker, but as you can see, it's completely gone now, so it's a nice clean plastic finish. The only thing broken on this system is this plastic panel right here in this corner. And even though we do have 2 of the rubber feet on the system, this one is missing one here and one here. The 780 has all 4 of these. Now again, this is just a minor detail because we could always set this upright as it is, even though it's upside down. Here we have the remnants of what used to be a sticker, and you can see that there's actually a difference in the color of the metal. This is what it's supposed to be, and here we have the weird finish. Again though, it's not really that big of a deal because the front, where you actually look at the system itself, is in fantastic shape. This is probably one of the best parts of both of the systems, which is actually a little strange to think about because, you know, this is the front of the system. But at least it does look nice, and it cleaned up really well. There was a lot of dust in this area right here, as you'd expect, but now it's completely clean. It looks fantastic, and I guess we should really rotate this depending on how we set up these systems. So we know that both of these Dell desktops actually power up. Both of these are now cleaned up, so even though they may not look completely brand new, they are definitely a lot nicer to deal with because they're actually clean, and it really did help out with the cosmetics because the plastics look much better than before. We got rid of that extra sticker residue, and in general, these just turned out to be really awesome Dell machines. The one advantage about not having a perfect system is that even though it may not look the nicest, at least I won't be super concerned about extra scratches or something happening to the metal or the plastics. It already has some amount of damage, but then again, I'm still going to try my best to keep it in as good of condition as possible. It's not like I'm gonna use these in a way where it's gonna get destroyed. I still try to take care of this stuff, even if it isn't, you know, the fanciest or even just like an Apple desktop like the G5 right there. But the real question is, what exactly are we going to do with these systems? That's the same question I had when I first set up the newest Dell OptiPlex, which we used in today's video, and it turned out to be super helpful. Not only is it a Windows 10 system that I have ready to go, I can use it in cases like this when I have to test out the hard drive, and it worked as intended. I was able to actually test out the USB adapter, so having a known working system for stuff like that is really convenient to have on hand, and that's kind of why I set it up in the first place, because I want to use it more, and the same thing is going to apply to these 2 systems here. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the 380 yet. This is going to be a unique type of system because it has a Pentium. Obviously, I'm going to use maybe Windows 7, which is what is installed. Maybe we could use something older. This would definitely be an excellent Windows XP type of system. But for the 780 here, considering we don't really have a usable OS on the system here, I have another idea in mind for this, and this being a Core 2 Duo system instead of the Pentium opens up further possibilities. Not to mention we have further expandability with the RAM, and we do have a larger internal hard drive, but then again, that's something I can change in the future if I want to swap it out for something else. Same goes for this. And what's really awesome about this design language of the Dell cases from this era is that even though this is just a standard type of, you know, office PC, the design language of this system reminds me of the server equipment from back in the day. So we still have the awesome Dell logo. It has this awesome ventilation here, which reminds me of the server systems as well. And I guess if we really wanted to, we could put the 780 on top of the 380 and create some kind of combo system, because having it side by side really does make it look like a small server. If both of these systems had, you know, essentially identical specifications, so we had the same CPU, same amount of RAM, then I might actually end up using it in a configuration like this. But considering both of these systems are slightly different internally, I think it would make more sense to use them standalone, but still having it in this configuration, it looks really cool. And I guess we'd have to rotate the Dell logo so it looks a little nicer, but it definitely has that mid to late 2000s server appearance, which is just straight up awesome. I guess you could get a similar appearance if you had the full-size tower, but having the slim version here, it just looks even better than I could have imagined. Now, don't get me wrong, it's no Apple Xserve or anything awesome like that, but it's still really cool to see both of these Dell systems in this configuration, even though it took a while to actually realize what to do with this Dell right here. The same kind of applies for these systems right here. If you're interested in seeing what we actually do with these systems, then consider subscribing to the channel. There's going to be a lot more awesome videos on this topic right here. We're only just getting started with this because I have so many other desktops that I can't wait to take a look at. I mean, we still need to actually set these up in the first place, and I'm just so happy that we're finally able to take a look at these systems properly. It's a Dell OptiPlex. Yeah, it may not be a Macintosh G5 system, but it's still really awesome. If you enjoyed today's video about taking a look at these awesome Dell systems, then consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see more awesome content, whether it be about the Dells, more Macintosh nonsense, e-waste actually being used, then stick around because I've got so many other awesome videos in the works for you guys. I can't wait to upload even more, but that's going to be it for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.